Welcome to Discover Janesville. My name is Yuri Rashkin, and we are guests here today at Fagan Automotive. And I also would like to welcome Fagan Automotive on board as our newest sponsor for Discover Janesville. My first guest is Tom Brien. Tom has been at the GM plant for many years. Tom, thank you for, first of all, thanks for joining us. How long have you been at the plant?
Actually, I was there for 42 years. I hired in 1967, and I was actually one of the last employees. I finished up in Isuzu for when the plant actually quit production.
So that makes sense because when the production was done, there were some Isuzus that were still being made afterwards.
Right. The plant itself closed down in December, and Isuzu's kept going until just about the end of April.
And how did you end up in Janesville to begin with? What brought you here?
Well, actually, I'm originally from Adams Friendship. It's a small community in the central part of the state. And I graduated actually in high school in 1966. There wasn't a whole lot to do up there. In '67, I did have a seasonal job with the state of Wisconsin, and that was going to end at the end of September. So I had friends that came down to GM, and well, actually it was Chevrolet and Fisher Body back then, and had gotten jobs. So I figured, well, I'll come down and put in some applications because Chrysler and Belvedere was actually just starting production too. So I figured out of 3 chances I might get hired at one, and the first place that I happened to stop at was the Chevrolet side, and just so happens they needed 3 people that day, so I actually got hired right on the spot that day. So there were 3 of us that got hired. Right.
That you got there and...
Yep.
Why do you think you got hired? What made, in their mind, what qualified you to be there?
Well, back in those days, there was a lot more people coming and going. Naturally jobs were more plentiful, and it was right after changeover, so they needed extra people. And so actually they asked me if I could do 5 push-ups. I did the 5 push-ups, and he said I was hired. So.
Really? So there was a physical. Okay. Interesting. And so after you got hired, and how many was there positions that you worked at the plant? I mean, everywhere, or?
I worked in just about every place but the body shop. I was on days, I was on nights. Back then, well, I should qualify that because back then Chevrolet and Fisher Body were 2 separate plants when I first hired in.
Okay.
It was actually a wall went down through the middle of the plant, and you could be disciplined if you went from one side of the plant to the other, but each had their own separate cafeterias, medical department, personnel. So even it was within the same facility, they were 2 separate ones because Fisher Body would make the bodies, then they would ship them over to the Chevrolet side, and then they would put in the trim and do the exterior.
And ship them over just meant taking them around the wall?
No, actually it went up over the top with the carriers and stuff, because actually the plant is two stories, and in some places it was actually 3.
How many people were at the plant when you started? Do you remember?
Oh, I think totally there was around between 5,000 and 6,000 people there. And that was one of the things when the plant closed, when we were still working 2 shifts, it was probably down to 2,500.
Right.
They eliminated the second shift, and then it was right around probably 1,500 people when the plant finally stopped production.
What vehicle were you involved with when you first started? What vehicle were you making?
Actually, they made the big Chevrolets, the Priuses and Impalas, and that's back when gas was cheap. And that was one of the cool things about coming to Janesville then. They always had gas wars. So
what do you mean?
They would fight back and forth about who would be the lowest price gas. So gas would probably be only like 25, 30 cents a gallon back then. And so that was one of the neat things about coming to Janesville. But we built the big Chevrolets. That's back when they had the 427, 4.25 horse with a big 4-barrel and 4-speed. And so that's back when the muscle cars were still in.
How many vehicles did you see go through? Do you remember?
Well, they started out with the Impalas and Caprices. Then when they went to the energy crisis, then they started making the smaller Chevrolets.
Okay.
And so they made Chevrolets, and they actually made Oldsmobiles, and then they had a mini Cadillac that they made there too. And then at the same time, on the other, that was when the plant actually went into, like General Motor, into the single division then. So, but then they also had the truck line going on too.
Right, because the plant was designed for two lines at the same time, wasn't it?
Yep. And then when gas got plentiful again, then that's when they eventually switched over to building the SUVs. The truck line had gone away, and we were actually building medium-duty trucks over on that side of the plant then.
Now, for somebody who worked on the line, how much change did you see in terms of from vehicle to vehicle to vehicle? Was your job essentially the same, or was it totally different depending on the vehicle?
Everyone is different because of the makeup of the parts and things like that, but the basic things are still the same, but it's just the parts that you put on them would be different, because naturally a smaller car takes a lot less parts than a larger one. That was one of the things too. You figure when I started at the plant, I was making $3.35, and by the time that I was done, I was up to $30 an hour.
Well, those were always a good paying jobs, and that was
definitely.
And union had a big part of the reason that got to be that way.
Yes, and that's, we went through the up swings and down swings, and one of the things as far as the union, back in 1970, we were actually on strike for 2.5 months down there.
What was that like?
And it was very hard because we were out so long that back then I think we were only getting like $35 a week for strike pay, and the UAW had mortgaged everything they had because of the length of the strike. So at the very end, we were without any kind of benefits at all then. And actually the old 95 Union Hall is no longer there, but my son was like 2 or 3 years old, so I'd take him down there. We would walk the picket line, and then he would actually go through the soup kitchen with me afterwards, and that's kind of how we survived back then. But
sure.
It was difficult, but we made it through, and that's one of the things that through the years I've always been able to survive the up and down swings. There are different times where they cut back, they laid off a shift, and I was always able to survive and come out okay in the end of it.
Did you always think that did you think that the plant would be there for forever, or was there kind of always doubts, or how did you feel working there?
When I first hired in, actually, General Motors, it's the largest corporation in the world, and you never envisioned back then that they would get into the financial problems that they did. But later on, as the economy started changing, and there were always those rumors that were going around that the plant might close, and we were always successful in avoiding that. So
so the rumors were there, so you got used to that. That was
yeah.
part of it. Okay.